Tonight is a Shiur. I want to continue with the whole the concept of Pesach and the spheres which we are obviously counting, which leads up to Shavuos. And I mentioned that it's really one period of time, even though they look like separate holidays, but really they're connected. You see. And in many ways, that's why we say, the first day, the second day, third day, because what it really is, we're counting days from Pesach, right, all the way to Shavuos, because there is a continuity here, which I'm going to speak about. I spoke a little about it, last week, but again, but before I get into that, I just want to mention that today there was really terrible news that Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein was nifta. And that's tremendous loss for, this type of work, especially when you talk about the darkness that is in this world is unprecedented in many ways. The amount of depravity and corruption and evil of this world is in many ways outstanding. So you really need people that are gifted in being able to restore or help people, come back or stay with Judaism, In other words, you need people that can be mechazek, strengthen, reinforce, emun and bitochen, faith in God, or belief in God, I should say, and trust in God. And Rabbi Wallerstein was one of those gifted people. So a loss of a person like him really is in many ways a tremendous blow to this type of endeavor, which is so important today. The only way I can really, in a certain way, we don't really know why anybody dies, or certainly why they die in that time. But one thing is clear, at least it's clear to me, is that for the last 2 years, we have lost a tremendous amount of people who are righteous, spiritual, or really, gifted, tremendous Talmidei Chachomim. We've lost Rebbes. The list of people that we've lost would fill sheets of paper. You see, I'm not even going into Reb Chaim Kanievsky and so on, because he was the Godel Hador, and I gave a shiur all about him. But there have been tremendous amount of deaths. And the question is, what's going on? Because these people who die, they're not replaceable, really. And what happens is that even if you try to replace them, you replace them with people who are inferior, So there are inferior people who I think that rise to fill their slot. But the truth is, in many ways, they are inferior. We have no choice. But this is really what's happening, There are people, obviously, who are really choshev people. Not everybody is inferior. But there's a constant change of people who are replacing people who pass away, but they are not of the same stature. So somebody like, Rabbi Zechariah, Wallerstein, is difficult to replace because he was a very gifted speaker. He must have brought back thousands of people over the years to Judaism, back to Judaism. He spread the word of God throughout. But there is one way of understanding, and I mentioned this, that what happens is that at the end of time, you see, justice demands to be satisfied. And even if the Rebbe wants to bring the Mashiach, he has to satisfy justice by his own decree, you see. So the Satan raises what's called his kritrugim, his prosecutions, that he says it's not fair, these people don't deserve Mashiach or whatever, and therefore, we have a right to rule. So what's happening here? So the Moshe says, you're right, and I therefore will compensate for this by satisfying justice. And there are many methods that the Moshe employs. One of them is called the death of tzaddikim, or the death of righteous and spiritual people. We know this because, it says by the Paraduma and Miriam, the death of Miriam, and the Chazal tell us, that the Paraduma is next to the Parsha of Miriam to tell us that the death of a tzaddik is tremendous kapora. So I believe that what's happening is, in order to satisfy justice and bring the Mashiach, many righteous people are going to die. Now they themselves, because they, in certain sense, are dying before their time. In other words, if not for that complaint by the Sultan, would they have died? Possibly not. But people are dying in order to serve a higher purpose, which is to finally end the rule, the reign of the Sultan, to finally end evil. So there are many people that are dying, that are chosen, as a compensation for the evil in order to satisfy justice. And that's why so many people have died. You see, it's not enough with COVID and a lot of the suffering, inflation or whatever that's going on today. There's a tremendous amount of suffering going on. But apparently that is not sufficient. So therefore the Rebbe has to utilize another method to add to the kapora, to the atonement. And that is the death of tzaddikim and righteous people. You see. So this is what's happening. We are seeing many tzaddikim, many people of stature, many people that are, really in many ways at the forefront of bringing Jews back. And this is because the Jewish people need an atonement, a kapora. So I believe that's a very important reason why we are seeing such an extraordinary, disproportionate of people who are really righteous and really play a pivotal role in bringing back the Jewish people. It's all to satisfy justice. And remember, this is exactly what happened in Egypt. When Moshe Rabbeinu came to Paroi, there was the same complaint by the Sultan. So God said, you're right, I have to satisfy justice before I bring the Mashiach, which is Moshe Rabbeinu. So therefore, all of a sudden, Paroi said they're lazy, and therefore they have to gather straw. You see? Which enormously multiplied and intensified the suffering of the Jewish people. So in a certain sense, they were able to reduce many years of hardship into a very short amount of time because of that gezerah, that decree of Paroi. And once it was fulfilled, then the Ribono Shel Olam brought the Makkos that destroyed Egypt. I believe the same mechanism is happening, the same dynamics is happening today. In any case, certainly it's really very terrible. But in any case, before I begin, I want to dedicate the Shiur to the Aliyas Neshama of Rini Molko, which is Regina Bas Yosef Reuven, that the Shiur should be for her as an Aliyas Neshama. In any case, so this is what I believe in many ways is what's going on, unfortunately. But all of this, ultimately, I just want to mention that those people who are serving the Jewish people by dying and therefore giving the Jewish people a tremendous atonement and kapora, they will receive an incredible reward for that service. In a certain sense, that's the avodah that they're doing. So just like they receive tremendous reward when they do the mitzvahs, Torah, right, and spread the Torah throughout, their death in order to help the Jews bring the Mashiach will allow them to achieve infinitely greater heights in Olam Haba, even though, they're not aware of it. But to remember, God does not do anything without just compensation. So I believe they certainly will, all of them, will have tremendous amount of aliyah meaning elevation in the Messianic era, when they get up from the dead, and also in Olam Haba. Anyway, at least hopefully that will provide some type of clarity. Now, what we've seen so far is a very important idea, and that is the concept of removing the Zohama, this pollution or contamination that the Satan has, which is mixed with this world. Now, if you recall from the previous 3 shiur, I think this is number 4, which is very important really to go through and understand, because they provide the foundation for this year. But in any case, Adam Marishan, because of his sin, fell into a lower world, which is a world of Asiya, this world, but it's a world of Asiya that is mixed with what's called the Zohama. What is the Zohama in many ways? Well, we don't really know, because it's a spiritual process or a spiritual entity. But what we can understand is the following. Zohama is some type of a force, or some type of it's hard to say, but let's say residue of the Satan. It's a projection that he has, that he can interact with the physical world. And it's a mixture. So the physical world has this Zohama. Now, you should be aware that there are physical laws which reflect this interaction or mixture with the physical world. What are they? Well, one, there's a law of physics. I think it's the second law of thermodynamics. It's called the law of entropy. And what that says is that all systems, if they start out at a high energy level, all of them diminish. That's the natural order of things. In other words, they get less automatically, unless they are infused with new energy. Why is that? Because to go from a high energy state to a low means what? It means some type of diminishment, right? Or deterioration. That law of entropy is there because of Zohama. Because if you think about it, what is the Satan? The Satan's major job is what's called destruction. He's a demolition expert. That's what he does. He destroys, you see. And what he tries to do, instead of an enhancing being, right, he diminishes being, deteriorates or decomposes being. So therefore, in the physical universe, there's an ultimate law called entropy, which is the second law of thermodynamics, which means that all energy states will always go negative, downwards. And that is the physical manifestation of the Zohama. Now we really see that all living forms, no matter what they are, will ultimately decompose. They will all deteriorate. In other words, everything dies. It doesn't make a difference what you are, whether you be human, whether you be a one-celled animal, an amoeba, and so on. You will deteriorate and ultimately cease to have life. That's also Zohama. That's the product of Zohama in the physical universe. What's interesting, and scientists recognized and was discovered, the concept of telomeres. At the end of cells or chromosomes or whatever, at the end of them, they all have these things called a telomere. It's like a shoelace that at the end of the shoelace it has a plastic that holds together the shoelace, you see. So what happens is every time a cell divides, that telomere at the end shortens. And finally, after 50 divisions, that telomere, which is the cap on the DNA or whatever, if it doesn't exist anymore, then that cell dies. That telomere is the physical or biological manifestation of the Zohama. In fact, it's interesting to note that before death came into the world, which is before the sin of Adam, he didn't have any telomeres because he was supposed to live forever. He was not in a world that was inhabited with Zohama. There was no satanic mixture at all in the world that he inhabited, and therefore he doesn't die, you see. But however, once he entered the physical world of Zohama, then of course decomposition takes place, and therefore everything dies. Plants, animals, insects, humans, it doesn't make a difference. So we see therefore that the manifestation of Zohama in this physical world is either decomposition of all living entities, ultimately in death, or in the physical universe in terms of energy, the law of entropy. So therefore, that's really what Zohama is. It's some type of a projection of the Satan, right, that invades or interacts with the physical world. And since we are physical, our bodies are physical, even though we are neshama, right, which itself is an unbelievable miracle. How can you take a neshama, a soul, which is completely spiritual, and not only is it spiritual, but its material is divine, which I had mentioned previously, and somehow insert it into a physical body? It's just absolutely, you see, incredible. But in any case, the body is one thing if the body is physical, but it's worse because the neshama is in a body that has Zohama, you see, that has this contamination or pollution or filth, however you want to translate that. So clearly then the objective is to remove the Zohama. Now how do you remove Zohama? Well, there's something else, and it's part of the Torah. And most people really have no idea what it is. There's a concept called tumah. Tumah means impurity of some sort, you see. And there's an entire section of Shas which is devoted to the laws of tumah. Tumah, this type of impurity, is some type of a spiritual entity that can enter or reside in a body. All kinds of laws, and the study of Taharos, which is a section that is given over, right? That section is all about tumah. What are the laws that govern the flow of this spiritual entity called tumah, and how does it reside in physical objects? You see? So there are a tremendous amount of laws about this. The question is, what in the world is this? What is tumah, really? You see? You have a whole seder of Shas, section of Shas that deals with tumah. You see? What tumah really is, it's very interesting. It's called surface Zohama. You see, Zohama pervades the physical body. That's what Zohama really is. But it cannot be removed. You see, the only way to remove it is if a person dies, is then buried, and his body decomposes. You see, so there's no physical body really, so therefore the Zohama leaves it. And that's the whole concept of Tchias HaMesim, of resurrection of the dead. You see? Because the problem is that you cannot remove Zohama. If you recall, I said the concept of zikuch, which is to remove the impurity, or to dematerialize matter. You see? So what that means is that the body has to remove its Zohama, and then it can be purified, right, dematerialized, with all the mitzvahs that it did. But mitzvahs cannot remove Zohama. It cannot purify Zohama. The body has to remove the Zohama, right, and then the mitzvahs, which become activated, which the person did in his life, can remove, right, the physicality. That's called zikuch, you see. But it can't remove the Zohama. Therefore, the Zohama has to be removed in another process, right? And that process is death. That's why Adam had to die, because he had to remove the Zohama in order to get to a purely physical body. And then what would change the body from physical to spiritual, right, would be the mitzvahs, the commandments that he did. But the question is, wait a minute, how do you remove the Zohama? Because the mitzvahs that he did cannot remove Zohama. So therefore, it was decreed that he die, the body decomposes, and therefore the Zohama leaves. Once the Zohama leaves, then the body is resurrected. That's called Kessin, right? And the body then is only physical. If it's only physical, then when the mitzvahs become activated, without getting into the whole process, then the body turns into a spiritual entity, which I mentioned, like the malachim. So therefore, death is the removal mechanism of the Zohama, where the mitzvahs can now perform zikuch, right, which is to refine or to remove that Zohama. You see. So therefore, that's the only way to do it. But Tumah is interesting. Tumah is Zohama on the surface of the physical. You see. In other words, you can't remove Zohama unless a person dies, but you can remove what's called the surface of the body, which can have Tumah. But the source of the Tumah is really the Zohama. But what's interesting is that the Tumah itself, which resides in the body, which is on the surface, can be removed by a mikveh. There are different removal techniques, you see. So what happens is if a person goes to the mikveh, or if he engages in other ways, for instance, the paraduma or whatever, then the surface Zohama, which is Tumah, right, is removed, which is very interesting. That's the concept. So therefore, Tumah exists because of Zohama. But what the Moshe doesn't want is, in order for you to interact, right, with Kedusha, or holy things, for instance, you cannot walk into the Beis HaMikdash or eat the korbanos, the sacrifices, the offerings of the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because you are Tomei, and you will interact with the Kedusha, the holy objects, and make them Tomei. That is a terrible sin. In fact, it's Chayav Koros, and so on. So therefore, you have to remove the Zohama on the surface, which is called Tumah. You see? So the Moshe therefore allowed you, because he doesn't want you to interact with the Beis HaMikdash or its offerings, with Zohama residing in you, or I should say, Tumah residing in you. So Zohama, which is part and parcel of the physical, that's okay. That doesn't interact with the Kedusha. But the Zohama on the surface, which is Tumah, that does interact with the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore it has to be removed. So one of the ways of removal is really very interesting. The Moshe decreed that if there is water, rainwater, right, of a measure of 40 saw, that's a quantity of water. If you go into that 40 saw, right, then the Tumah cannot follow you. It's almost as if as you go down into the water, which is the mikveh, right, the Tumah rises. And finally, when you are completely immersed, the Tumah now is excluded from the body. That's how a mikveh works. Tumah cannot reside in a mikveh. So as you go down, the tumah goes up or outside of the mikveh. And finally, when you completely immerse, the tumah leaves. And you get up. And you are now pure of the tumah. Of course, there are rules and ideas and regulations and so on. But that's the basic dynamics of a mikveh. But in any case, that's what tumah is, you see. Now, what is interesting, therefore, is that tumah has certain stages of removal, you see. If a person becomes tameh, let's say a person touches a dead body, then he will become tameh. Now, there is a period of time that he cannot remove the tumah, no matter what he does. A paraduma or mikveh will not work. See? So that tumah is ensconced in the physical body. It's not removable. Then after 7 days, after certain procedures, then the tumah becomes removable, you see. So that's a second stage. But in order to remove it, you have to apply, let's say, a mikveh. Or in the case of somebody touches a dead body, you have to apply the paraduma, which is the red heifer, without going into the whole ceremony. So that's a third stage, right? And then once you apply that, then the person is called tor. Tahara is nothing more than the absence of tumah, you see? So therefore, the tumah is removed. The problem, of course, is the person can reinfect himself with tumah, because there's tumah all around the physical world. Well, what's interesting is when the Jews removed the Zohama, and this is the incredible aspect of Pesach, is that the Zohama was removed. Not just tumah, but the Zohama itself was removed from the physical body, you see. So it's the same stages. So first they had the Zohama, can't remove it, you see. But then after all the suffering, the Zohama became removable, you see, just like tumah, that stage. And then in the 9th Makkah of Choshech, where it says, and to all the Jewish people there was light in their dwelling, that's a tremendous allusion, right, for the fact that the Zohama, for the first time in history, became removable, just like its counterpart, surface tumah, can become removable. But you have to remove it, you see. So that entered the next stage, right? So the Jews left Egypt with Zohama in their physical body that was actually removable. We're not talking here about tumah. We're talking here about Zohama, which is irremovable. And the only way you can get rid of it is you die. But because the Jews had made it removable because of their suffering and so on, it now became removable. And therefore, 49 days, which is astounding, there are 49 levels of Zohama. And each day of the Sphira is a removal of one level of the Zohama, not merely the tumah, which is an incredible concept. It never happened before in history, you see, that it actually became removable and was removed. So the Jews at Har Sinai actually had bodies in which the Zohama was extricated, was externalized from their body. And the Gemara says this, that the Jews by Matan Torah at Sinai, they were like Odom Rishon before the sin. It says that. It's a Gemara. It's not a Zoya, it's a Gemara. What does that mean? That means the Zohama, which they had, now actually became removable, or was removed, I should say. So really, when you think about it, they were not normal. We don't know what they were. And to show that they were not normal, they were extraordinary, because they had no Zohama. You know, if a person has no Zohama, we don't even know what that looks like. I'll give you an example. After 7 days, there was Kriyas Yamsuf, right? And the Torah tells us, or the Medrash, whatever, the Chazal, that at Kriyas Yamsuf, a maidservant was able to understand and comprehend divine secrets of Kabbalah that even Yecheskel Hanovi did not know. So the question is, what is that supposed to mean? What'd she do? She didn't go to yeshiva, you know. And we're talking about a maidservant. We're not even talking about the menfolk and everybody else. And the answer is because if you take Zohama and remove it from the physical body, then your ability to access the divine light, the divine knowledge, which is called the Or Rishon, becomes possible. You see, we don't even know what that means or how we're affected by the Zohama. You see. And the Torah refers to it in an interesting way, where it says, Umol Hashem levavchem, God will circumcise the heart, right? What does that mean? That means He will remove the Zohama. You see? In fact, the concept of circumcision is to remove the physical representation of Zohama. That's really what you remove by a bris. That concept of the Olo, or foreskin, is the physical representation of the Zohama. In fact, Adam Rishon did not have that Olo at all. And when he did the sin, he actually grew an Olo, and the Olo really represents that foreskin, that represents the Zohama, you see. So Adam Rishon, he created, he was responsible for the creation of the Zohama. So that's what it means, that God will circumcise the heart. He will remove the Zohama. We don't even know what we're going to look like. But whatever it is, it's going to be a stature that we cannot even believe. The ability to access divinity and divine information will be absolutely incredible. You see, so, and then at the Yom Suf, which was 7 days, they had removed 1/7 of the Zohama. Could you imagine what it is if we remove 49 pieces or parts of the Zohama, which is what they removed at Har Sinai? Now, the reason why there are 49, right, is because the Satan can take the Nitzotzei Kedusha from only 7 spheres. We know there are 10, you see? 10 spheres. And each of these 10 are further subdivided into 10, you see? So if you add them all up, and those are the main ones, the main energy of the divine source. So if you multiply 10 times 10, that's 100. So there are 100 principal spheres that provide the energy of the entire creation. Now, what's important to know is that the first 3 we have no concept of, and that's Kessin, Chochmah, and Bina, you see, and they really represent the foundation of the lower 7, which is Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus, you see. Those first 3 are called the Gimel Rishonis, the first 3, and they are the source of divine energy for the lower 7. In fact, the visibility or the ability to experience those first 3 will only happen, right, in Olam Haba. But the lower 7, which are energized by the upper 3, their energy creates the entire universe, actually. In fact, there are 7, and that's why there are 7 days of creation. You see, each day mirrored one sphere. But since these 7 spheres are the energy source, the intermediary energy source of the entire physical world, you see, so the Satan can only take the Kedusha, the sparks of holiness, what's called Yoinek, only from these 7. But these 7 are really part of the 7 spheres, because he can only take 7, the lower 7. So since there are 10 spheres, he can only take 7 of them, of the original, and then even of these 7, he can only take 7, because they are the energy source of the physical world. Comes out that he could take 7 times 7, which is 49. There you have it. So he can take the energy of 49 spheres, you see, and that energy allows him, right, to project the Zohama into the creation. And therefore, what the Jews did, right, is they took out, or they removed the Zohama, the 49 levels of Zohama. See, I hope I've explained it sufficiently. And this really is the days of Sphira. That's really what we're counting. And if you take a look at the Siddur, it says to remove the Zohama. It actually says that in the Tefillah that we say, right, by these spheres, right, to remove the Zohama. And that's exactly what we do, which I'll get to, and that's what the Jews did. So imagine the Jewish people are now standing at Har Sinai, right, with the Zohama of the Satan externalized, because what they have done is remove the sparks of holiness, right, from the Satan and brought it back into the side of Kedusha. And that's what the Makkos were. In other words, the spheres became, in a certain sense, represented, physicalized, and that destroyed Egypt. So it was the very 10 spheres, really, that destroyed Egypt, as I had mentioned previously. So this is what's going on, you see. So we now have an understanding of Zohama. We understand the concept of a mikveh, of Tumah, why there are 49 levels of Zohama, and now that the Jews are now standing at Har Sinai, you see, which is amazing, because the next thing that they have to do is what? The next thing the Jews have to do is destroy the Satan, kill him. You see, it's funny because in the physical world, even if you go to the mikveh and you remove the tumah, it can always come back in your body. You see, if you touch or whatever, carry certain things, items, right? So therefore, we can always reinfect ourselves. So therefore, what the Jews did at Har Sinai was they externalized the actual Zohama, which means they externalized the Satan himself. You see, that means he was outside the body, which would have meant that the laws that manifest itself from the Zohama, which is entropy, right, and telomeres, whatever, the Jews were, in a certain sense, immortal at that point in time. You see, in any case, therefore, what they would have to do is destroy the Satan. So what the Rebbe Shem did is he gave him one last test, which is interesting. If you take Adam Harishon, for instance, you'll find that he was an awesome being. He wasn't even like us. He had no Zohama, right? He was an awesome being. All he had to do is that one mitzvah not to eat from that tree, right? And he would have immediately brought down the light of the spheres, the energy of the spheres, and he would have been Mashiach, right? But before he had that, he would have one more test. And that test was a test, it's almost like a philosophical test, right? He knew that God was Yichud Shlitosoi. He knew that God was the greatest power source of all. He saw that. He was placed into a world that was fully developed, because he was created on the 6th day. So he knew God was what's called Yichud Shlitosoi, that he's the ultimate, right, ruler and power of everything. But what was denied him, the insight that God not only is the ultimate power, koyach of everything, but God is the only thing that exists. That's called Yichud Metziusoi. That God is the only thing that exists. That's classic Einod Mavadoi. So he was denied that insight so he could be tested. Oh, you see. And what the Satan did, knowing this, is he offered him a certain idea. He said to him, and Rashi brings this down, he said, right, to Chava, you can be his God. What does that mean? He said that, wait a minute, you're right. God is an unbelievable power source. But God is not the only being. In fact, God, his whole power comes from that tree. That's the real power source. So what he was saying, the Satan, the Chava, she passed off the argument to Adam, is that there's another power source. That's the tree, which is the Eitz HaChaim, and that's why God doesn't want you to eat it. Because if you eat that tree, you will be like God. And he says that to Chava, Yisem Kelokim, you will be like God. You see, so what he's saying is that you're right, he is an incredible, powerful being. But there's something more powerful than him, and that is the tree. If you eat from that, then you become God. That's exactly what he offered to Adam Harishon. You see, now Chava fell for that, whatever, and then Adam, she repeated it to Adam, and he fell for that too. So what Adam failed to realize is that Yichud Mitziusoi, that God is the only thing that exists, and that tree is a setup, it's an illusion that there's another power source superior to God. This was the problem. Why did God give him that test? It's almost like a test in philosophy. Because had he withstood the test, then he would have experienced Yichud Mitziusoi. You see, he would actually have experienced Einoi Milvadoi, that God is the only thing that exists. Because that's really what we experience in Olam Haba, you see. So God said if he's going to experience that, then that has to be his test. So when you think about it, somebody who's at the end of time is going to get a test of philosophy, you see? And that's what happened to Adam Harishon. Therefore, the Jews got the same test. Since they had what's called extricated the Satan and his Zohama, right? And by the way, that also meant the collapse of the 4 levels of evil, right? They also had to be tested because they were like Adam before the Chet. So they needed a test just like Adam, right? Is God Yichud Mitziusoi? They knew he was all powerful because they witnessed the 10 plagues. They witnessed the Kriyas Yamsuf, which is probably the greatest miracle that ever happened. If you look at the Chazal, what happened in that miracle was much more than just the splitting of the Red Sea. It divided into 12 parts. I don't want to go into the whole thing, but it was just beyond belief what that miracle was. So now they had to believe that what? That not only is God the greatest power source, he's the only thing. Oh, so the Satan realizing, right, that this is the last test, because if they pass this test, then he dies. And he knew that, because the Satan is now out of the physical body. And if they pass this test, he dies. So he was desperate, you see. Now the test was what? Can God be represented by a physical entity, namely some type of a deity, some type of an idol? Now, did the Jews believe that this idol was God? No. Doesn't even make sense. But they did feel that God can be represented by an idol. But we know that's absurd. That's why there is no idol. There is no physical representation whatsoever in any way in a shul or even in the Beis HaMikdash. There's no image of God. Nothing can represent him. So because they allowed, actually it was the Erev Rav that did that, because they allowed the Erev Rav to build this idol, which is the golden calf, therefore the Jews failed the test, right? And as a result of that, if they failed the test, then they could not be privy to Yichud Mitziusoi, to experiencing the oneness of God, or the exclusivity of God. You see? They had the same test as Adam Harishon. And therefore, automatically what happened was the Satan was able to be yoinek. He was able to recapture a great deal of the sparks that he had given away. Bad news, you see. Because that's what God wanted, you see. So therefore, he was able to recapture, which is very, very important, you see. And because of that, God had to make major decisions, because now the Zohama re-entered creation, you see. The Jewish body, so to speak, now became again part of the world of the Zohama, you see. Because of the sin of the golden calf, since they failed to realize Yichud Mitzvusai, that there is no other power, and God cannot have any intermediaries. How can a being, right, that is the only thing that exists, have an intermediary? It's absurd, you see. So that was a rejection of the concept of Einoid Mavadoi, and as a result of that, they reintroduced the Zohama into creation. So this is a very important idea of what happened. And besides that, there are other things. You see, the problem was, and I will end with this, the problem is this, is that the Jews have to remove the Zohama and kill the Sultan, which they almost did. But like I say, the Sultan was successful in fooling the Jews. But in any case, as a result of that, what happened? Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the Mashiach ben Yosef, that's really who he was. And he would have been Mashiach ben Yosef had they not done the sin of the golden calf. Then he could no longer be Mashiach ben Yosef, you see. In fact, God says to him, Lech Reid, go down. Go down, what does it go down mean? It means not just go down from the mountain, but go down from your stature. You cannot be Mashiach anymore, because they have reintroduced the Zohama. In fact, what's important to know is not only have they reduced the Zohama, you see, but they can no longer be privy to that ore which they would have gotten, that Orishan, that incredible light, you see. In fact, what's interesting is because they had removed the Zohama slowly, therefore, as a result of that, as time went on, you see, in fact, that's what it means. Moshe Rabbeinu took out what's called Vayikach Moshe es Atzmos Yosef. He took out the bones of Yosef, because of course Yosef promised that they have to take him out of Egypt. So he took out the bones. But if you want, you could read, instead of reading Vayikach Moshe es Atzmos Yosef, the bones of Yosef, it could read Vayikach Moshe, and Moshe took out Atzmus Yosef, the essence of Yosef. You see, because the light of the Mashiach was trapped in Egypt. And once the people had restored the nitzotzes, the sparks to the spheres, then they could take out what the sparks would represent, which is the messianic light. And that's the light of Yosef HaTzadik, who was the foundation, the Shama of Mashiach ben Yosef. So they took it out. And therefore, when they restored the Zohama, right, what was the thing that they built, the idol? It was a calf. Why a calf? Because the symbol of Yosef is an ox, a shore, which is basically a calf. So therefore, the shape of the idol that they made is the symbol of Yosef, right? And they worship it as part of what? As an intermediary, which is an idol, and so on, right? And as a result of that, that calf represents that the light of the Mashiach ben Yosef is now back in the hands of the Sultan. That's why that was a calf, or a calf. Because that represented that the messianic light of the calf, which is Mashiach ben Yosef, right, is now being used as an idol, so to speak. So it's back in the hands of the Sultan. And that is why the Egel was a calf. You see? Because that's exactly what they had undone. they took the light of Yosef HaTzadik, which is the messianic light, Atzmus Yosef, right? And they had restored back into what's called the domain of the Satan, you see? And that's why it was a calf. In any case, so far we see an incredible saga of what really is going on. This saga of Pesach and the Spheres and Torah, which I'll talk about next week more, is a cosmic cataclysm, catastrophe, because it was the first time the Jews had removed the Zohama, and the Satan was about to die, and they had brought him back, the Zohama, back into creation, and as a result of that, everything changed. And I will continue the saga next week. Any questions?
Yes. Just explain to me again, I missed it. The calf was a symbol of the messianic light being been taken away from Yosef and given back to the Satan. But why the
Correct.
calf? Why the calf? What does the calf have to do?
He's an ox.
Because the symbol on the Merkava, the divine chariot, is an ox. One of them is an ox, right? There's a face, the chariot of God, called the divine chariot, has 4 wheels. One of them is Odom, a man, the face of a man, which, by the way, is the face of Yaakov Avinu. The second is an ox, which is the symbol for Mashiach ben Yosef. The third is a lion, which is a symbol of Mashiach ben David. And the fourth is an eagle, which I think I once spoke about, what that represents. But in any case, the ox is the symbol of Joseph. In fact, that's what it says at the end of the Torah, B'chor shoyroi hodoloi, right? The firstborn of his ox, beauty at his, and that is the bracha that he's given to the tribe of Yosef, right? So therefore that calf, which they had succeeded, ox, which they had succeeded, so to speak, Atzmus Yosef, the essence of Yosef, and taking out of Egypt, that's why Moshe was able to take it out, was now restored to the Satan himself. You see? So he now had the Orishim in what is called the Klippa, back into the domain of the Satan. But that's what it is. The ox is a symbol of Yosef.
What is the purpose of the divine chariot? Like, what is it exactly? And why do we need it? Why do we know about? Why does God have it?
Well, the divine chariot, basically, not really getting into it, but basically, it's really very simple. What is a chariot? We don't have chariots anymore, right? But what is a chariot? It's a vehicle. It's a vehicle meant to bring a person from point A to point B, correct? That's what a chariot is. It's a vehicle of old, right? That's what they used to have. So God uses the divine chariot as the symbol of Kabbalah. Why? Because the essence of the Jew is to bring God from point A to point B. God is outside the universe, and God wants to re-enter the universe, right? So the way he re-enters is the entire structure that interfaces between God and the physical universe. And that's really what the study of Kabbalah is. You see, Kabbalah is the study of the total mechanism of how God, outside the universe, interfaces with the physical universe, right? That's what it is. The study of that, it's a study of the spheres, partsufim, whatever. So the chariot is the symbol of that study. The chariot is the symbol of a vehicle. And that vehicle is the actual mechanism that brings God back. That's what a chariot is. It's a vehicle of transport. And that's the representation of Kabbalah, right, which is really the interface between God and the physical world. You know, It's like, in a certain sense, I hate to use this comparison, but for instance, plumbing, right? You need to bring the water from the reservoir, right, all the way to your faucet. So there's an entire mechanism, pipes, right, that brings it, and pumps and pipes and so on. Well, in that analogy, the mechanism to bring God into the universe, which means the chef of the Ein Sof, means the divine energy and so on, you want to bring it from point A, which is beyond the universe, or beyond all the entire creation. You want to bring it into the creation, right? And as a result of that, change the very nature of the physical world. That's basically what it is. But it has four wheels, which means that it rides ultimately on 4 points or 4 concepts. One is Adam. Man is the one who does it, right? Man is the one who brings God back into the world. Therefore, his face is a wheel, and that really is Yaakov Avinu, you see. The second face is Mashiach ben Yosef, because he's the one who removes the Zohama. The third face is a lion that represents Mashiach ben David, and that's the world without Zohama, right? He's the force that removes the Zohama and brings the whole world to a physical level, just like Adam Rishon before the sin, you see? And the Mashiach is the last thing that we have to do. We don't have to do any Tikun beyond Mashiach ben David. When this world ends in the year 6000, which is the English year 2240, that's the end of the Tikun. We do not have to do anything anymore. You see, so that third wheel signifies the termination of the whole Tikun process. Because after that, from the year 2240, which is the year 6000, God does everything. From the 6th to the 7th to the 8th to the 9,000, that's in God's domain, not us. And the last aspect of the vehicle, wheel, so to speak, is an eagle. And the eagle represents God. Because without God, we could never have done the Tikun. He has to have input also. And that's the Hanogas HaYichud. That is the mechanism which I will speak about in the future. That's the incredible actions of God that guarantees there will be a Tikun. You see, even if man in some way is failing. Why is God described as an eagle? Because in Ha'azinu, that's how he is described. As it says, as the eagle bears its young above it, because the eagle is the highest flying bird. So what it does, it puts its young on its back, so there's nothing below it that can reach its young. You see? And the eagle, obviously, is the king of the birds, and so on. So the eagle represents God that has the Jewish people on his back, that nothing can really destroy the Jews. And that was the symbolism of the Sina, the burning bush, that even though there's a tremendous fire that surrounds it, it's not consumed. In fact, the Torah says that, because the Jews can never be consumed, because they are the vehicle of Tikun, you see? So that's really what the chariot symbolizes, with those 4 wheels or conveyances. You see?
So then, is the chariot the main energy source, and the Sfirot come from it?
No, the chariot is the symbolism, is the structural symbolism of everything. That's why it represents the framework of Kabbalah. It's a vehicle, you see, that wants to transport God from one point to the other point, which is the destination. Because in the end, that's really the whole gist of this creation. Is God removed himself in the beginning, right? And he wants to come back. He wants to interact again with the Jewish people, and he also wants to interact with mankind. You see, whoever deserves it, and so on. And that's really the essence. That is the essential dynamic of the whole purpose of creation. God's return. Shechina, right, means the residence. Shochein means to reside. God wants to reside among man in however he does it, we don't know. And that's through dvekas and so on. You see? And that's the essential purpose. And I should say the essential destination, the essential dynamic. You see? The essential goal of the whole creation is to come back and interact and be part of man's existence for eternity.
So then, how would you define the Shekhinah? Like, how do we define it in a way? I know it's God's presence, but is it God? It's obviously it's not God himself, so what is it exactly? Like, how do we...
Well, very simply, because it's really the whole Shiur of who is God, but very simply, there are different perceptions of that presence. The Shekhinah is the perception of God, or how he is viewed when we are physical. But then his perception, right, at the level of soul is going to be different. You see? So he doesn't change. Our view of him changes, you see, based on the state of existence that we have at that moment. So Shekhinah is basically the view that we can have as created entities. And there are many levels of Shekhinah. It's not just one Shekhinah. Because like I say, it's just, well, which view do you have? You know? It's like you're looking at somebody, right, with through a telescope. Now, you can look at a telescope that has a small lens. So you see them, but they're sort of like obscure, and they're very small. But the greater the lens, the greater is the ability, right, to observe, greater clarity. See? But the person doesn't change, or whatever you're looking at doesn't change. It's your view that changes based on the instrument you're using. So the Shekhinah really is the view, indicates the view that we have of God within a creation realm. You see? But to view God in terms of who he really is, which is Ein Sof, impossible. But God has created a way that we can view an aspect of him, right, whatever, that through the medium of creation, he can be viewed in a certain way. You see? It's just that there's a certain lens that can view him. You know? There are much greater lenses. You see? If you are in the world of angels, then your view of the Shekhinah is almost infinitely greater. And if you are in the upper worlds, right, then your view of him is much greater. And finally you get to Olam Haba, so your view of him is unbelievable. And what's interesting is that the view itself is infinite, which means that Olam Haba is infinite, because Olam Haba is really a place that every single day, let's use that as a unit of time, your view improves of God. You see? Now we cannot imagine what that means. How can God be viewed with an infinite amount of lenses? But that's what happens, you see? So Olam Haba will afford us a view of the Shekhinah, because we are created entities, that actually goes on for infinity. It's unbelievable. You see? We cannot imagine what that means. But basically, it's a view of God. You see? And with that view, it's not just looking at him within the context of the type of beings we are. There's infinite pleasure with that view, which we do not understand. You see. So that's the essential experience in Olam Haba, to have an infinite gradations of the view of God, thereby experiencing this unbelievable amount of pleasure. Look, these things are beyond comprehension. Look, we don't even understand what it means to remove the Zohama from the body. I mean, we all have Zohama in it, right? We get sick, get diseased, all this kind of stuff. We don't even know what it means to have no Zohama. They, the Jews, were the first ones to experience, besides the Adam, what it means to have no Zohama. You see, even though the Satan still existed in their day. And unfortunately, they allowed him to re-enter by capturing many of the sparks, recapturing, I should say. You see? So that's really what the Shekhinah is in a very simple way. You see? So it is the presence of God, just it depends on your view. You know, for instance, you're looking at the galaxies, so you got the view of a binoculars, right? Then you got the view of a small telescope, then a larger, let's say, refracting telescope, a mirror telescope, and then you got the view of the Hubble telescope, and then the latest one, which they just brought up, is the James Webb. They say that's going to be phenomenal. So could you imagine looking at the universe with this unbelievable telescope called the James Webb telescope? It's the same universe, same galaxy, but what a difference in view. Same idea with God in Olam Haba. That's what the Shekhinah is. It's the ability to view Him altogether at any degree, you see, based on your existential level. You see? I hope that's clear.
Does our merit also correlate to our view?
Yes. In fact, that's the main thing. Based on your merit, the greater the view. Yes. Because the view is the reward. But remember, I don't want to make it sound dry, a view. You mean that? That's all we got to look forward to, is to see God? No. Seeing God is experiencing God. And that's the greatest of all pleasures. Because experiencing God means experiencing existence itself, which has to be understood and described. We don't know what existence is in and of itself. We have existence, but we have no idea what it is, you see. And apparently that's the greatest of all pleasures. And this will happen not in the Messianic era, but in Olam Haba, in the future world. You see.
Okay, so you were discussing how the Satan, he recaptured the sparks of holiness from the Jews when they sinned in the golden calf.
Yes.
So what guarantees us that the Satan won't try to do that again when the Mashiach ben Yosef comes? Great
question. And the answer is be'itoi. Because there is a deadline where God swears, because you're right, this can happen over and over again. I mean, it's like, okay, we extricate him, and then all of a sudden he recaptures. Come on, how many times can this go on? But there's what's called the be'itoi, in its time. There is a deadline that in some way God makes sure that it ends, you see. How he does it or what he does, we don't really know, you see. So in other words, the Jews were able to externalize the Satan in Egypt, but that wasn't be'itoi. That was what's called be'avodah. They actually had to work to do it, but it could always be restored. But there is a way where it can't be restored, when the Jews will have done something, not only to extricate him, but to kill the guy. To kill him. So apparently that's what happens. It doesn't stop, and we don't know the exact mechanism, but whatever it is, he dies. And obviously if he dies, the entire kingdom of evil collapses, and therefore it's over.
So the Be'ito is basically in the year 2030 when
it would seem. Let's hope it is. Yes, it would seem so. Yeah, because when the Zohar says that the resurrection of the dead will be in 2030, that can only happen if it's Be'itoi, right? So there will come a time that we will actually succeed in destroying him, not merely externalizing him, but killing him. So obviously that's the end of the entire empire of evil, you see. And we all wait for that day. But that's really the end of our process. Remember, that's our contribution to the Tikun. Then from there, once he's destroyed, remember, there's no Zohama, but there is Geshem. Then God takes over, you see? And it goes on and on. And that's what the Messianic era is. It is a world of physicality, not tumah, not any type of defilement or pollution or whatever. That's over. So our job of Tikun has ended. And like I say, we have no idea what that will be. I mean, in a certain way, think of that maidservant, that Oma Ivriya at Kriya Samsov, when only 1/7 of the Zohama was accomplished, right? Could you imagine what she saw, right? And what she knew and what she experienced? We have no idea. And that's only 1/7 of the Zohama out. Can you imagine what it is if all of it is out? We don't know. But whatever it's going to be, the experience, the joy will be thousands of times greater. Remember one thing. The Messianic era is not only a time that brings relief, right, from evil, suffering, death, disease, hardship, right? It's not just relief, but God will introduce an era, if you want to call it utopia, which is unmitigated joy. So we cannot even begin to understand what that world is. That's something to understand. It's not merely the cessation or termination of evil, and therefore all the subsequent, phenomena that are associated with it. It is a period of time where everything is absolutely phenomenal. You see, we don't even know what that means, and so on. That's the Messianic era, because the Tikun will have been complete. It's interesting that God wants us to experience the physical world beyond the Tikun. No, it's not that people have to die and then all of a sudden wake up to an Olam Haba. No. He wants us to experience Olam Hazeh in the greatest possible way. And then he will arrange where Olam Hazeh this world becomes Olam Haba. That's his job. Our job is to prepare Olam Hazeh for Olam Haba. You see? But we will experience Olam Hazeh, this world, in a way which is incomprehensible. That's the good news. You see? Great. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And what was that?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes. There's a lot to think about. A lot of lofty ideas to think about. I'm trying to what's called describe this cosmic event called Pesach, which is now what you begin to see, you see, and that I will continue, because there's more to talk about, the redemption itself and so on, what really happens, and so on, and also, how, can we replicate what the Jews did in Egypt? So I have to go through that also, what the mitzvahs are, chometz and matzah and all that.